Hello and good evening and welcome to what are we now, episode 20 of Montague Island Books. And this week our guest grew up in Scotland and she originally studied psychology and philosophy at the University of Oxford. After graduating, she moved to London to train as a clinical psychologist and worked in NHS mental health services for over 10 years. She now lives in the Lincolnshire countryside with her husband and cat. And her first novel, Little White Lies, was published in 2020 and was shortlisted for the Crime Writers Association John Creasy New Blood Dagger. And Safe and Sound is her second novel. Now, I printed all kinds of little stuff off here as well. I went on a website and as I say, she's a chartered psychologist and therapist, and of interest to probably some of our authors that are watching. She also offers a consultancy service for writers regarding sort of mental health work and things like that, because they frequently get misportrayed in novels and stories and films, and it just contributes to the stigma, but I'm sure she will tell us more about that as we go through the evening. So welcome, Philippa East. Good evening.
Hello. Hi, Joe. Nice to be here.
Lovely to have you. So after the introduction, I think I got either off Amazon or off your website, and obviously a little bit about the work that you do from your website. So do you want to tell us more about you, about your books, and how you manage to balance work and writing?
Yeah, sure. So I've been writing for probably about 12 years now. So I started started just for fun, really. I thought it'll be really fun to write a novel because that's the kind of fun I like to have. And it actually was quite fun, but it was a terrible novel. But then I started writing short stories for quite a few years and really kind of found my way into the writing world, the writing community through that, and managed to get quite a few of those published, which made me think that maybe I was okay at this kind of writing malarkey thing. Maybe I could actually make it a bit of a thing, you know. And then in 2015, I quit the NHS. And I was working full time in the NHS at that point, and I decided to go into private practice. So for a number of reasons, really, one of which was just I felt I could provide a better service to my clients by working, you know, without all the politics and limitations of the NHS, basically. But it also gave me an opportunity to go part-time and give myself more time for writing. And after many failures and trials and tribulations, I got my first book published by HQ HarperCollins. Hi, cat. There's a cat crawling around.
Yeah.
Which is called Little White Lies, and it's published by HQ HarperCollins, and it's about a family whose missing child is found alive and comes home 7 years after her abduction. So it starts where most other missing person stories ends, basically. And then I had a 2-book deal with HQ HarperCollins, which was fantastic. And my second book, which is Safe and Sound, which is this one, came out in February of this year. Is that right? Yeah, my timing is all muddled up because of COVID, basically. And that one is it's another sort of psychological suspense book, and this one's really a mystery. It's about a young woman who is known to be charismatic, pretty, full of life, but she's found dead in her London bedsit, and the real mystery is how her death has gone unnoticed for 10 whole months. So that's me and my books.
And you put it very bluntly there, but there's so much more to it. But obviously we can't say because we don't want to give any
no spoilers.
Give the story away. But just go ahead and buy it because it is a great book. So if anybody wants to buy your books, where can they get them? And you know, sort of what versions of the books available?
Yeah, so both of them are available in paperback, ebook, and audio. So the paperback, I mean, you can get them through your local, you should be able to order them through your local bookshop. I know some branches of Waterstones stock them. If you particularly like to support independent bookshops, a really great online site that I always recommend is bookshop.org, which is you can basically get any title through there, but a whole bunch of proceeds go to independent bookshops. So even if you don't have an independent near you, that's a really good place to buy books. And then obviously we have the Amazon, if you must.
Yeah, and I presume Amazon's the main place for your audiobook, yeah, or what's it called?
Yeah. I'm not actually too clued up about how audiobooks work. I know people also get them through other things, but yeah, I mean, wherever you buy your audiobooks, you should be able to get it, basically.
Yeah. And if people want to contact you or follow you on social media, where can they do that?
Best place is probably Twitter. I'm on there all the time. I'm always happy to say hi. You know, whatever. All my events and stuff are on there as well. So I'm on there as Philippa_East. Nice and simple.
Super. And website? Have you got a website? I know you've got a professional website for your work, so to speak, but.
Yeah, I have a website for my psychology practice. I don't have a specific author website, but I do have. I have an Amazon author page, so even if you don't want to buy your books from Amazon, you can look me up on Amazon. I keep that pretty up to date. There's a few fun videos and things on there. It's got lists of all my titles, all my books, including some anthologies that people, short story anthologies that people might not have come across otherwise. So that's a good place. That's a good landing page to go to for me. Yeah.
Wonderful, that's great. So now, sitting very patiently is your guest that you're taking to the island with you. So do you want to, and she's got a visitor in the room we saw earlier, which hopefully we will see again at some point. So would you like to introduce your guest tonight, Philippa?
Definitely. So when you were saying about inviting a guest on, initially I was like, oh my God, like who would I invite? And I thought about some kind of writer friends, and then I thought, well, I want to do something a bit different because, you know, this is such a cool idea on this show. So I thought, who is kind of like a sort of non-writer sidekick when it comes to writing? And I thought, it's my sister, right? Because Katherine is a huge reader as well. We both grew up without a TV until Katherine put her foot down with our parents when she was about 12 and I was about 11 and insisted we get a telly. But before that, basically, we just entertained ourselves with books. So I think probably we're really similar in that we both read loads. And also, I think because Katherine is such a voracious reader, and also I think she's kind of like my target audience, I tend to send her my early drafts of my books. So she's kind of like my very first reader. And she's very honest and very good with her feedback. I know she's not going to pussyfoot around anything. Also, Katherine was involved in helping create and inspire this fantastic cover for Safe and Sound. And I can talk a little bit about that. But basically, the design team at HQ were having quite a difficult time figuring out a cover image. And Katherine basically came up with the inspiring idea that cracked the problem open. So yeah, Katherine is my older sister. She's 1 year older than me. She is a trained lawyer, but also very creative in the area of kind of art and design, and particularly interior design, which is super cool. So yeah, that's my sister Katherine, who knows me by, yeah, sorry. Good evening, Katherine.
Hi, yeah, Helen was just, sorry, so that we have to explain that I know Philippa as Helen because she was christened Helen Philippa and spent, I don't know, the first 18 years of her life being called Helen, and then put her foot down when she went to university and decided she didn't want to be Helen anymore and was going to be Philippa from now on. And stubbornly, you know, her kind of immediate family sort of couldn't cope with this whole concept, so continue to call her Helen to this day. So I guess it's going to be very difficult for me to refer to her as Philippa. We're just going to have to kind of live with the confusion, I think. And when I say Helen, what I mean is Philippa. I should just refer to you as Miss East, and then that would be Dr. East. Sorry. Then
I'll put in brackets. Maybe I can.
Yeah, Philippa.
I'll put Philippa East, and then I'll put in brackets here, Helen.
To be honest, it's not something. This is something we've had before, because we once had a guest on, and they had 3 author names. So it was like, what do I call you? Because they wrote on the pen names, and it was like, it got very confusing, because it was like, well, this is a book, but this is under this name, and it was so. At least all your books are in the same name.
Yeah.
So far, you know, she might have an alternative career. And
yeah, you might not know about my erotic fiction. No, I
don't. So that's great. Well, it's lovely to meet you both. Now, I know you were talking just earlier when you were introducing Katherine, Philippa, about your reading, and obviously we're looking at your other work that you do as well on your psychology. Do you feel that sort of writing and reading is your sort of escape from the real world?
Ooh, that's really interesting. No, actually, I wouldn't think. Well, hang on. I would say that reading maybe is to an extent. Like, I love to be completely immersed in a book and go somewhere else, be somewhere, step into somebody else's life, and just. Yeah, I love being completely immersed in a story, in a story world. Writing and psychology feel really close to me, in that I feel like what I'm doing in both of them is trying to make sense of human beings, basically. And a lot of the time I'm writing not so much to escape the world, but more to try and understand it, basically, to try and figure it out. And so yeah, I think I went into studying psychology was I'm just trying to figure out myself and other people and how we all operate. And then I think that in a similar way, I'm exploring that when I write as well. So I'm often trying to answer questions that I'm struggling with when I write. So it's not, maybe not so much of an escape in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from though, because I really connected with Safe and Sound and really sort of immersed myself into it. But even at my old age, I've just started a degree with the Open University doing psychology.
Oh, wow,
I'm just
fantastic.
on my first year. So I think that probably helped to understand where you were coming from more with the book as well, because it was looking at the sort of the people side of it and the psychology side of it. So I totally can totally see where you're coming from with that. Now, I just noticed we got a message in the chat from Louise, and she said, my daughter did that at age 11. She insisted on a change of name, and we still struggle. So you're not alone. You're not alone. You're not the only one. So thanks for that input, Louise. So what we'll do now is we will get you ready, get your suitcases out, and get you ready to pack off to Montague Island. Now, for those that don't know it, I come up with the idea for the show following watching listening to Desert Island Discs, and also reading Mike Craven's The Curator, because part of the story, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but part of the story involves a fictitious island off the coast of Cumbria called Montague Island, and I just moved up to Cumbria, so I thought, well, there's an ideal name. So I had a chat with Mike, and he was happy for me to use a name and what have you. So when you arrive on the island, there is a fictitious Kindle with all the Mike Craven books on that you can read, as well as the books that you're taking. So you're both taking 7 books each. So first of all,
can we swap as well, so we can read each other?
That's what we always did
when we went to the library. It's like, you get 8 and I'll get
8. Definitely.
Except I don't think our reading tastes are actually very similar, to be honest. We'll chat about this beforehand. The kind of books that Helen picked, I think, are not going to be anything like the ones that I've picked. So I don't know if I want to see your books, Helen.
Something nice though. It's sometimes nice though, isn't it, to get to read a book that is of a genre that you've not sort of maybe read for a while or you've kind of ignored. And if somebody gives you a book and you read it and think, actually, it's quite good, this. So, you never know, you might, convert each other to different genres or different styles. So that's great. So anyway, we'll look at your first book that you're going to take. So Philippa, what's your first one?
So my first one is the book that I'm always banging on about, which is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. And anyone who's ever spoken to me before about writing, this will have come up at some point in conversation. I think it's the masterwork of a psychological thriller. It's basically done everything that you want a psychological thriller to do in the best possible way. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. Some people just don't get on with that book, but I really, really admire what Gillian Flynn did. And also, up until I read Gone Girl, I'd mainly just been reading kind of Penguin classics, basically. And I didn't really read a lot of contemporary fiction because there wasn't really anything that I just didn't really find a genre that I clicked with or authors that I clicked with. But I was lent Gone Girl by a friend of mine, a work colleague actually, and read it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like it's quite possible to write in beautiful prose and explore really complex social and interpersonal themes and put it all in a cracking page turner. And I was like, this is I've come home to my book genre, basically. So that was the reference point that I would always go back to.
Great choice. And I think you've basically what you're saying about her books, I think you've done with with your latest book, because it does sort of look at issues that you probably wouldn't discuss normally, but you can in the book, and it gets it out into the wider general public as something to debate. So I think you've sort of reinvented that, so to speak, with your with your books.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's what I'm aiming to do. I don't think I match up to Gillian Flynn, but it's nice that you feel that comes across. Yeah, thank you.
And just while we're on the subject of psychological thrillers, this is something I always ask, because I love psychological thrillers as well. But I always ask people, because I get different answers. Do you think there always needs to be a crime in a psychological thriller?
No. I mean, this is a little spoiler, but it's not a huge spoiler. In Safe and Sound, there isn't technically a crime. I think actually, I mean, obviously there can be a crime in a psychological thriller, but I think often I like to think of a psychological thriller as often being about the threat of a crime, the threat of, someone killing somebody or whatever. Or I sometimes think of it as kind of like interpersonal crimes, like a betrayal. Sorry, my cat's trying to clamber over. Like a betrayal, or someone keeping a secret from you for a really long time. Like that's not a legal crime, but it's kind of like if you're in a relationship and you deeply love that person and trust that person, and they've been lying to you, that's pretty world shattering.
Like a moral crime, isn't it?
Yeah, like a moral crime. Yeah. So I think that jeopardy, the sense of jeopardy and threat, and the idea of kind of moral crimes can work for a psychological thriller as much as a legal crime. Yeah.
Great, wonderful. I say it's always interesting me, because some people say, "Oh no, it's got to have a crime," but I agree with you. I don't think it does need. Well, you proved it. I don't think it does need to have a crime. Where a lot of psychological thriller authors always seem to want to, from what I've read anyway, want to build that in. But very interesting to hear. So, Katherine, what is your first book going to be?
Mine is, I have a copy. I don't have a copy of all of them, but I have a copy of most of them.
Oh yeah, I didn't even bring my copies.
My Family and Other Animals by Jerry Darrell. Which, I mean, I don't know, this is a very old copy, but I think I first read it probably when I was maybe like 11 or 12. And I think it was my first dose of kind of the travel bug. of like suddenly sensing that there was, you know, all these other places that you could possibly go and be and live. And I kind of was just, I mean, it's so funny, you know, I think it was also the first book that made me laugh out loud and would get me to that point where you read something and it just tickles you, and for whatever reason you can't stop laughing because, you know, the more you read it, the funnier you find it.
Yeah. And
I think in some sort of way, the family slightly reminded me of our own. Not that we're that nuts or quite that sort of eccentric, but it was just this sort of a little bit of just general messiness of when all the family gets together, that everything's a bit madcap and a bit sort of hilarious. And I don't know, I absolutely fell in love with him as a writer, and I think read all of his books and all the ones, you know, about his various trips all over the world collecting animals. And I think I at one time like donated my birthday money to his like conservation zoo in Jersey or something, wrote him a letter and was like, you know, I love your books and everything. But yeah, it was just my first sort of, I think it was my first experience of escapism and just, you know, a complete other world opening up in a kind of adult book when you're young, you know, just being able to kind of really identify with a grown-up book, if you like. Anyway, that's my first one.
Love that. And I think it makes, when you read something like that, it makes the, particularly as a youngster, it makes a big wide world seem that much more, I was going to say touchable, but that's wrong, but much closer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know, it just brings it all into you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, so that's great. And also, Philippa said so good. And Penny said, did you like the recent TV adaptation, Katherine?
I didn't actually watch it because, and I don't think I would have wanted to watch it. I think in my head, the characters look a certain way. I envisage them a certain way. I mean, for, you know, his mother, for some reason in my head is my grandmother, although she would not have been that old, you know, at the time that the book was written. So it's like seeing Keeley Hawes, I think, in character, I was just like, no, that's all wrong, you know. And I don't know, I don't want it to, I have my own, I struggle with adaptations of books a lot because I have a very firm idea in my head of what the characters look like, and then when you see it and it doesn't work, you think, no, that's not right. So no, I haven't seen it, and but I hear it was good. So
yeah. And Penny agrees as well. She feels the same. Have you seen it, Philippa?
No, I'm the same as Katherine. I forgot, like, that was one of my favorite books growing up as well, and all the series, well, not series, but all the different books that he wrote. And the same reason I didn't watch the TV show. I mean, something that's also kind of funny, actually, is this book isn't on my list, but one of my other favorite books is The Alexandria Quartet by Lawrence Durrell, who is Gerald Durrell's brother. And he's like a super literary, like wears a beret and everything. Very literary writer. And it's so funny reading the books of My Family and Other Animals, because Gerald's just completely taking the piss out of his older brother for like swanning around and being a writerly type. It's sort of like seeing the other side of it. It's
that's one thing about family, isn't it? You can do that when it's family. You can rip them a little bit. And Louise Fain said she also loved My Family and Other Animals too. So that's great. It seems to be you know, well, the book anyway, maybe not the television adaptation, but the book was very well welcome there. So we've got you both packed your first book away now into your case. So what's the second book going to be, Philippa?
Can I actually just run and get copies of these books? Because having advised Katherine to bring copies, that would be cool. I also want to show copies of my books. So talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah,
ask Katherine about her second. I'll go collect my books.
We'll go to Katherine first of all.
She's so organized.
So what's your second book going to be, Katherine?
So my second one is like, I pretty much need a forklift because, you know, it's a Suitable Boy.
That's a big book. You could use, actually, that would be very good on the island because you could use that as a weapon.
Well, you know, I think big books are important if we're only allowed to bring 7. But this, I mean, I think it's, and I wouldn't normally read something that is this big but again, I think I read it maybe age 13, and I completely fell in love with it and was just utterly captivated. And again, for people who don't know, it's basically a love story set in India, of the mission to find a suitable husband for the main character Lata. But it's like the kind of Bollywood equivalent of EastEnders. It's like just one huge soap opera, and contemporary, like, sort of historical telling of what was going on in India at that time, partition, all the problems that happened, the inter-religious violence, and like struggles of gay characters in kind of a conservative society. And it's, for such a large book with such a lot of prose, there's a huge amount of humor in it. I mean, there's one of the families, basically communicate with each other in rhyming couplets that have to be kind of amusing. And it's just, I think it grows with, I've read it multiple times, despite how large it is. And I think you kind of change your opinion as you age as to which suitor she ought to have gone with. When you're young, like very young and sort of teenager, like I was when I first read it, you think that she should go for the kind of the grand passion that she meets, who's probably really unsuitable. And then there's the sort of friend type person that, seems like a good option, but maybe isn't dependable enough. And then there's the kind of dependable person who's chosen by her family, who, she thinks in the end she could grow to love. And then the first time I read it, when I got to the end, I was so annoyed that she'd gone with this older man who seemed utterly boring, and, that she maybe would learn to love him at some point. And it kind of grow, and, as you go through life, I don't know, your interpretation of the relationships all change. And I think I have a different relationship with that book now than I did when I was 13, and when I did when I was 20, and when I did when I was 30. So I mean, it's it's a bit of an undertaking to read it every time, but and again, for me, it was travel bug. It was just like, here's this beautifully exotic place that I want to go to at some point, and he absolutely takes you there, and you kind of, you're completely in this other world. And I love it, despite how huge it is. I will read it, I'm sure I'll read it multiple more times over the course of my life. So,
and I think
is this the Equal Music?
No, A Suitable Boy.
Oh, that's the one I mean. That's the one I mean.
And I think it's great. It just shows the sort of the depth of the writing as well, if you can read a book at different ages and get a different take on it each time. I think that shows how sort of powerful the writing is, really, doesn't it?
Just makes me think how good the title is as well, because what you're saying, Katherine, is that, like, the central character is who should she end up with, and that every time you've read it, you've kind of shifted on that. And that, like, I just think about how hard it is to come up with good titles for books, and it's like, that's the perfect title, isn't it? Which is the suitable boy?
Yeah. Probably in the end, none of them, but you never know. It's just, it does just change.
Speaking of which, on titles, do you get to choose your own titles, Philippa, or do you give them a different name and then the publisher changes them, or how does that work for you?
I mean, I can certainly suggest titles, but I'm actually really bad at titles. So I generally just say to my publishers, like, you think of one. And so far they've been brilliant with their titles. Like, basically they've come up with like their idea, and I've been like, yeah, that's it. And the funny thing with Little White Lies is my editor suggested it, and I was like, oh yeah, it's really good, and I really like it. And then I emailed her back, and then she emailed me, and she was like, and I've just realized the family in the book are called the Whites. And I was like, oh my God, me too. It's like, yeah, like it's meant to be. But yeah, we didn't even realize that initially. So yeah.
I think titles and covers, which are, getting Katherine involved here as well. I think titles and covers portray so much. I think a lot of books that are issued now, they kind of think, well, it's this genre, so it has to have this type of cover. And I think it's nice to see something different, and something that relates to the book.
Yeah, definitely.
No,
Definitely.
that's great. So we've heard Catherine's book number 2. So we'll go back to you now, Philippa. Have you got the book?
I have, yeah. So first of all, this is Gone Girl. I'm sure that'll be very familiar to people. So that was my first choice. My second choice is this book, which very few. Well, I think there's a certain generation of people who will have heard of it, but not that many people. It's actually a YA book, and it was first published, I think, in the 91. And the writer, I think, is an Australian writer. So it obviously made its way over here. So yeah, it's basically it's a story about a family whose daughter has died from an illness. That's kind of the backstory to the family. But the story begins with the young. There's 2 siblings left, a young brother and then I think a middle sister as well. And the young brother just starts exhibiting really odd signs and behaviors, and to the point where his family think he might be possessed. And it's a fascinating book because it's kind of a horror, really. It's actually set out like a horror, and it's a very eerie and creepy book. But at heart, it's a family drama about grief. And I've read the book so many times, and it's a very haunting book. And again, I think it taps into something that I'm trying to do in my writing, which is, again, maybe write a book which touches on the tropes of, the thriller or the horror and has that kind of page turner feel, but is at heart, it's about families and families coping with something. So even though it's a YA book, it's incredibly moving, and yeah, I would certainly recommend it as just a really interesting book. Yeah, it's called Del Del, and it's by Victor Kelleher.
Great. Well, that sounds interesting, and it's obviously had quite a journey to get, and quite a following to get from Australia over here in, when was it, the 90s. It sounds like an interesting book. So great on that. Talking about the genres, YA and psychological thrillers seem to have really taken off in the last, I don't know, 2-3 years maybe. Can you think of a sort of reason behind that, or have you noticed the same thing? Excuse me. Have you noticed the same thing?
I can't really speak for YA, young adult books, just because I'm not very familiar with that kind of section of the market. I think my take on why psychological thrillers have taken off is that they have become the new women's fiction. So before, women wrote books about love and romance, and they were kind of dismissed as chick lit, and yeah, they were entertaining, and lots of people bought them and lots of people read them, but they weren't taken very seriously. And then on the other hand, you had kind of literary fiction, which was maybe quite dominated by men, writing very sort of, reflective, maybe poncy literary fiction.
Grand books, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think what the psychological thriller has become a really great vehicle for is women telling very female stories. So, but psychological thrillers were originally called sort of domestic noir, and it was basically the idea of taking the crime genre, where there's normally a crime going on out there in the world with often like kind of unknown criminal or murderer or something, and taking that whole sense of, and even the thriller genre was kind of doing that. There was a lot of kind of, spy thriller or espionage thriller or, kind of, sort of race against time crime type thrillers. But the domestic noir basically said, what if the danger isn't out there away, in some kind of place you don't really know and wouldn't normally go, and it's not some stranger who's does nothing to do with you? What if the danger is under your roof, and the danger is someone that you know and love and you live with and maybe even share your bed with? And that's a very, that tapped into a uniquely female experience, I think, about women's lives within the home, women's lives within the family, women's lives within a relationship, and the conflicts and sometimes the threats that they experience in that context. So I think that the thriller genre has just massively taken off because there's just these brilliant stories being told and these brilliant questions being asked, and then you've got all the fun of the page turning thriller as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my hypothesis. I don't know.
I agree with you on most of that as well, because as you say, it is something that's, it's not sort of out in the outside world. It's in the actual household, and I think that builds a lot of tension. And in a way, it's like portraying what EastEnders and what we were talking about earlier, what EastEnders and what have you, but going more deep into it. And I think now as well, because previously women's fiction or whatever was solely for women, and men would not touch it with a barge pole. Psychological thrillers are bringing more male readers into it as well now.
And writers.
Yeah, and writers, yeah, because there's quite a few male psychological thriller writers, isn't there now? And I think that's opening the genre up even more. So, as you were saying, maybe what you were saying earlier, plus the fact that we've got the male interest as well now, I think that's just, sort of blown the genre up to, the popularity that it is now. But great to hear about it. So we've done both of the book twos now. So do you want to? We'll start again with you, Philippa, to get things back on track. So do you want to tell us your third book?
So I've chosen, this is a bit of a literary classic, but I've chosen Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which I'm not sure it would have kind of not had such an easy road to publication now, because it's a slightly convoluted way that it's told. You've got to wade through a lot of, the narrator kind of sitting down with the housekeeper and sort of, anyway, there's a lot of kind of layers before you get to the story. But again, it's a book that I've read a number of times, and I think there was a bit of a misstep when they were making films of it, because they portrayed it as this kind of passionate romance, and it was sort of sold as a romance story. But again, it's actually a domestic noir story. It's about very dysfunctional and disturbed family relationships and romantic relationships as well. I mean, there's a scene where Heathcliff basically hangs the pet dog in a tree. It's like, that's pretty, talk about crimes and jeopardy, and it's just, I think it's a really raw portrayal of family dysfunction, basically, and I find that fascinating.
And it's something that people can relate to even today. It's one of those that people can pick it up and think, well, yeah, I can understand what they're going through and relate to it in that sense. So yeah, great choice. And Katherine, what's your book number 3?
Donna Tartt's The Little Friend, which for most people, I think Donna Tartt, they know her as the author of The Secret History, which is her kind of, really, really well-known one and like very acclaimed one. And I've read The Secret History and I like it, but I don't love it. But The Little Friend, again, for some reason, just completely captured my imagination. And it's basically the story of this 10-year-old girl called Harriet, who's trying to find out, how her brother came to be hanging from a tree sort of 10 years ago when she was just a baby. It's this sort of, I suppose it is a bit sort of domestic noir in the sense that it's it's all sort of funny, sort of messed up family relationships, but ultimately it's sort of a murder mystery as well, but the crime is never really solved. And it's got one of these like wonderful protagonists of this kind of bullish 10-year-old who just takes matters into her own hands and sort of, because she's so young, creates chaos. But it has this kind of insidious sort of creeping feeling of impending doom and disaster, like that just kind of, it's one of these really atmospheric novels. It's set in a sort of crumbling town in the sort of the southern US, and there's just this sort of feeling of sort of oppression and sort of impending disaster, because she gets mixed up with all these really unsavory characters, and things generally do go quite badly towards the end. But you know, it's just, I don't know, again, I just loved it. You know, you've got this kind of main character that you can really kind of get behind, and you sort of, she's this very likable sort of, but without being a very nice person, she's a very like sort of engaging character, I think, to kind of to get behind. And then yeah, just this kind of, well, what did happen? And then you never really find out, but somehow it's still a really satisfying book. And just the characters are incredibly well drawn, and you know, yeah, you just get this really clear sense of time and place, really, which for me, you know, escapism is sort of key. I need to be able to kind of feel like I'm somewhere else when I'm reading, I think. So I love that book, and I've read it and will read it multiple times.
Sounds great, and I love the way that but both of you have sort of mentioned books where it's really character led, you know. And just sort of out of interest, how do you both feel about locations? Do you prefer to read somewhere fictitious, or somewhere that you sort of may have visited or know about, or would you say it doesn't really make much difference? I'll start with you, Katherine.
For me, I don't think it matters, so long as it conjures, I mean, in some ways, I suppose maybe I prefer to read about real places, because then there's a possibility of actually going there, you know. I think anywhere that brings somewhere to life, any book that can do that, and where you feel that you're right there. I think I'm less of a fan of imaginary worlds in the sort of sense of, you know, the sort of genre of fantasy or science fiction, or not so much science fiction, but kind of space fiction, you know, the sort of things that are set in these very otherworldly places. I think I find them often kind of unconvincing, I think, maybe. I mean, I'm sure if it's done well, it's done very well. And, you know, I did love like The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy when I was younger, although I think it's a bit tiresome. And one of my books is very much set in a fantasy world. So, but yeah, I think probably for me, generally, I would rather read about places that actually exist.
Yeah. And what about you, Philippa? How do you feel on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually really similar to Katherine on this one. I reckon that I'm probably better with realistic settings, but whether they're fictionalized or whether they are actually real places, I don't particularly mind. I actually recently discovered that the author S.J.I. Holiday, Susie Holiday, has written a series of books set in our hometown of Haddington in Scotland. Well, a fictionalized, well, it's basically the town, but it's just got a different name. She calls it Banktown, I think. And I was like, oh my God, because no one's ever heard of Haddington. No one ever goes to Haddington. Like, nothing ever happens in Haddington. So yeah, I was just like, this is the coolest thing. So that was quite fun. But yeah, I don't really mind. Again, I think I'm more about the characters than this and the story than the place, perhaps. Yeah.
I think if somebody, if an author can describe a place really well, that can like create an extra character in itself, so the place becomes a character. I personally do like reading about, you know, real places, so to speak, but as you know, as you say, you look at the fantasy genre or things, you know, different things that if they're written well, it kind of doesn't matter, that extra character just comes alive. But interesting to hear both the takes on that. So we're now looking at book number 4. So what's your book 4 going to be, Philippa?
The Shining by Stephen King. Because we didn't have a TV when we were growing up for a really long time, I was like super sensitive to stuff on TV. And then I was growing up in the 80s, where there seemed to be a fashion for watching 18 rated films at 8-year-olds' birthday parties. So some of my first ever TV exposure at the age of about 9 was like Freddy Krueger, and I was just so traumatized. And I didn't touch horror for like decades, actually, because I was didn't think I could cope with it. But once I kind of got a little bit older and managed to like regulate my terror a little bit more, I sort of discovered that I did have a little bit of an interest in horror, really, particularly psychological horror, which I think is kind of a lot of the time what Stephen King is doing. And I think I'd seen the film of The Shining by that point, which I know Stephen King wasn't a huge fan of, the Stanley Kubrick one. Anyway, I then sort of actually thought I should actually read some Stephen King, and I read The Shining, and I was just really taken with it. And I think it was one of the first times I'd seen a writer using different points of view in a really elegant way. And I suppose because I'd seen the film, I hadn't really thought about point of view, and it was really interesting to see how he'd actually set it up in the book. And that was quite eye-opening for me about, how you might tell a story on the page versus, you kind of just get one perspective in a film that's just the kind of audience perspective on the action. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. So yeah, that was probably kind of a bit of a milestone book for me as well, and brought me kind of more towards liking horror again in fiction.
Great book. Talking about sort of films and books and linking them together, can you think of any films that you prefer the film to the book?
I think, not off the top of my head, I think a lot of the time when there's a really good film that's worked as an adaptation of a book, you often haven't heard of the book because I think it's worked better as a film. And maybe the book itself is a little bit obscure. And then I think the other way around, if the book has been really popular, often the film, like Katherine was saying, doesn't quite match up. Although saying that, I think one of the things that has got figured out recently with the screen is that a lot of books work very well in series adaptations. These great Netflix series and just these like 6 episode, 10 episode series, because actually compressing a book into a 2-hour film is actually, you lose a lot. So I think that maybe that's the format that is now working for books and people are using a lot better.
And obviously you've got the Bosch series and many others that going down the series format. So that's great. What do you think, Katherine? Can you think of a film that beats the book, so to speak?
I can't think of a film that beats a book. I can think of so many films that fall short, of their original sort of source material. I think Helen's probably right in the sense that, if there's a great film adaptation of a book, it's probably because the book was not, well known, and they're probably better suited to, a series format. I think you can get away with a lot more in books because you're not visually showing it, you're maybe just describing it. And I think a book that I love is Ender's Game, which Orson Scott Card. It's science fiction, which not normally something that I would love, but it's such a I love the book. It's such a fantastic book. And then they made a film of it with Asa Butterworth in it, and it was just, they couldn't show in the book. There's all these kids, who are quite young up in a space station somewhere, who basically spend a lot of time naked, and then playing these virtual while they're actually fighting real wars, but they think it's a video. So and there's a lot of bullying that goes on, and sort of and I think you can get away with describing that in a book, but you can't show it in a film that's in theory being marketed to kind of 12-year-olds. So I mean, the film was just, it was just awful. I just remember thinking, God, it's such a classic book. It's a great book, and they've made this, just rubbish. And I think, there's some things that just shouldn't be touched, really. I can get why they want to try. But I think, I can't think of a single film that I've gone and go, that's so much better than the book, unless the book was really bad to begin with. And
I've only got one that surpasses, where the film surpasses the book, and for me it's A Green Mile. I could not get into the book. Tried.
I've not seen the film or read the book.
The film was like amazing, but there's also books. One is more like fantasy. by Patrick Rothfuss, The Name of the Wind, and I keep thinking, please don't make it into a film, because I just don't think, I just the book is so complex and so deep and so world building that I just don't think they would do it justice. But interesting to hear you both. So we've now got your fourth book, Katherine. So what's yours going to be?
Well, very quickly, I was just thinking that maybe The Hunger Games. Those films are really excellent. Now, I haven't read the books, so maybe I would disagree if I'd read the books, but I know that speaking of, the fourth one is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I'll say first of all that I hate pretty much all of the film adaptations, with the exception of the third book and possibly the seventh film, which is not the last. It's like the penultimate one. I came to Harry Potter really late, because I think when she started publishing, I was probably already in my 20s. And originally my thought was, these are kids' books. Why am I going to bother reading, a kids' book? It's, I'm 20, whatever. And then I think I must have picked up the first one, I think at my cousin's house, because it was there. And even though I think the first two are probably the weakest, they're the most children's focused books, I just completely fell in love. I think it reminded me of a lot of books that I used to read when I was younger, that, about boarding schools, which for some, we didn't go to boarding schools, so it seemed like a wonderful thing to go and do. And then, it combined sort of like boarding school with magic, with sort of, and just, I know that, like her writing is not very literary, and, she doesn't necessarily write in a particularly, or at least these books, in a particularly sophisticated way, but I think she's a master of plot. And just, you really can't fault over the kind of the arc of the 7 books, just the plot, and the fact that she basically came up with the entire concept and the entire series in one go. And then, I just absolutely love them. And I'm one of those people that signed up when the last one came out, got myself in a waiting list and picked it up at some o'clock and sat in the bookshop and, devoured half of it and then had to stop, because I was like, I can't read it all at once. And this is the 5th one, which is the biggest, helpfully, for being stranded on an island, but also my favorite, just because it's all about rebelling against authority and sort of, undermining sort of oppressive governments. And, it's a bit, there's some, fat that could have been done to being trimmed, but I just like the whole sort of rebelling from within. And I think I have 2 children, and I'm sort of gutted that neither one of them have quite yet. My oldest one has read all of the books, but hasn't really fallen in love with them, and the youngest one has yet to kind of start. And I'm sort of a bit gutted that they haven't, embraced it as much as I have. But because it's the only, I'm very happy to read these books at bedtime, as opposed to some of the dross that they come and give me and say, like, I want this story. You think, oh God, do we have to have this one? Yeah. But yes, the Harry Potter series in general, I adore. So that's fantasy.
And that's great. And I think it's interesting, because I was having a conversation on Facebook a few days ago, and it was about young adult YA fiction, and people were saying, well, I don't touch it, I don't read it, but I've read Harry Potter. Now, a lot of people see Harry Potter as YA, so but you could also look at it as being fantasy. So I think sometimes it's a bad idea to box something into a genre, because people will just say, oh no, it's YA, or it's romance, or it's whatever, and they won't touch it. So it's interesting to hear what everybody thinks. Penny has had to go, so she is saying thanks for an entertaining hour, ladies. So that's Penny. Sadly had to go, but she will be able to catch up with it on YouTube, because it'll go up on YouTube tomorrow. So anyway, that's book number 4 done. So Philippa, what's your book number 5?
Okay, well, you bid the entire series of Harry Potter, so I'm bidding the entire series of Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. Boom! Mic drop. Okay, so yeah, we're getting a little bit into the realm of like literary, but actually, although people get put off this because it's really long and it's not, I suppose the kind of setting and the milieu is not hugely relatable, and it's about these kind of upper class French families in the whatever century, but I read it as kind of like a soap opera. Basically, it's like Proust is just going around this society and gossiping about everything and sharing it with you. And I just found, well, first of all, I have to say I was totally hooked from the first line, and Katherine will probably make sense of this, which is this is just me to a T. For a long time, I would go to bed early. I love being in bed. I love sleeping. I'm quite happy to go to bed at 8 o'clock. So I was like, I'm in, Marcel. I'm cool with this. I'm down with your style of rocking it. So yeah, I've read the whole thing, and I've often just dipped in and out because it's just like meeting up with an old friend and they're like, up to and yeah, it's yeah, I just enjoy it. Don't be put off by how big and bulky and literary it looks.
And the first line sold it to you. I think it's interesting though that you're saying, you know, we were talking earlier about psychological thrillers and, you know, soap operas just then. I think it's an interest, you know, and even going back to your psychology, I think it's an interest in people watching. I think people who like to people watch are very much into the sort of psychology of things and how and relationships and all that. So I think that is quite sort of an interesting link that links quite a bit of what we've discussed, you know, together. If you like people watching, you know, it's
I think that's spot on, Joe. I think that I am fundamentally a people watcher, and that's exactly what Marcel Proust is doing, and you're just like over his shoulder. And yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on, Joe. I think that's a really nice way of putting it.
Great. So what is your book number 5 going to be, Charlotte? We don't want to keep sorry, Katherine, we don't want to keep Philippa out of bed too long.
The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, which won the Booker Prize in 1977. It informs me on the cover. I think this sort of combined a few things for me. Again, it's about India. I seem to read a lot of books that are set in India and love them all. And it has this, I think it was the first time maybe that I came across a book where the language was really clever. And there was almost like a sort of, you know, it centers around these twins and their sort of childhood and their sort of the growing up into adulthood, but kind of the sort of fairly horrible things that actually happened to them when they were younger. And they have almost a sort of secret, not a secret language, but they have a sort of particular way of communicating between one another where they have, you know, sort of words and phrases and just the way that they say things. And of course it's mixed in with, it's English that's mixed with Hindi and Tamil and other languages. And I think I was just so taken with the kind of the way that she uses the language to convey the relationship and again, just to kind of convey the sense of time and place. And there were all these just little quirks in the way that she describes things that I absolutely loved. And it, you know, in the beginning, it seems like this sort of tale of fairly innocent, you know, middle class sort of children growing up in India, and then it becomes about something a lot darker and really, you know, it's done very cleverly. I think that, you know, you're drawn into this sort of ostensibly quite fun, innocent world, and then it's all turned on its head, you know, and you know, you have to look at everything again. And it, again, you know, it's, you know, it's quite a small book for me, quite like sort of the bigger, weightier things, but I just, it captured, you know, it was one of those books that I just instantly loved and thought, yeah, this is going to be a book that I, you know, read again. And I haven't read it for a while actually, so maybe it's time to kind of pick it up. But yes, language.
It looks like we've got a pet evening. I can see Nell's got a cat just sliding into the picture. We're all trying to get into the show this evening, aren't they? But yeah, that's great, Katherine. You know, great to hear about that, Katherine. And India seems to be popping up a lot for you. Is it somewhere where have you travelled to India?
Yeah, I have. I kind of actually, our grandmother, our dad's mother was born there, in Calcutta, and I think, I don't know, maybe it's hereditary or something I've picked up. So I mean, I love to travel. India was the first really exotic place that I went to, partly because I'd read so many books about it, and you know, it was a complete culture shock, and you know, I really didn't know what to make of it, I think, initially, but I kind of loved it at this, just, you know, absolutely loved the chaos and the color of it. And you know, I'd like to go back at some point when COVID is finished and we can all have a normal life again. But yeah, I don't know, there's something magical about India for me in fiction. You know, I mean, I wouldn't say it's my favorite country in the world, but like, I love books that are set there. I think they have such a rich storytelling culture anyway, and so many fantastical characters because, you know, of all the deities and everything, that yeah, I think it lends itself to drama and stories, really.
And you've got the class system as well, haven't you, as well, the caste system, so it's like,
yeah, you know, all these sort of social tensions, I think, that play out in so many different ways. And yeah, you've got, you know, extreme poverty and extreme wealth, and you know, all the problems that creates. Yeah, I mean, A Fine Balance by Rohinton Minstry is another one that, again, like, is very hard to read because it's desperate in so many ways. But again, it's another book set in that, you know, just that whole world that, you know, I love. Yeah.
Isn't it funny how we love to read desperate communities and desperate situations? It's something that always seems to, I don't know, to grab us. I don't know why.
I don't know if I loved that book. I was sort of, it was a bit like horror for me. I kind of couldn't look away. I felt like I had to get to the end, but it was heart-wrenching to read that one, you know, just thinking, oh God, you know, it's very much the flip side of A Suitable Boy, which is all kind of, you know, romance and parties, and you know, and this is very much this is what happens when you're not middle class, you know?
Yeah, and it gets into
reality,
emotions again, doesn't it? You know, it's another one that pulls on your emotions. So that's great. So we're now on book number 6. So what's your 6th book, Philippa?
Yeah, another little one for me to match Catherine's little one, another literary classic, which is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I think, like, it's just a perfect book. It's a novella, really. It is short, but it just packs so much in. And yeah, again, I just think the characterization is really phenomenal. And I was thinking, F. Scott Fitzgerald managed to actually create like an archetypal symbol in this book, which is, you know, that the green light at the end of the dock, you know, it's become like so symbolic, and that was, you know, something that he wrote in the book. And yeah, I just think it's such a neat, perfect book. And I often wish that novellas would have a resurgence, because so many classics are actually novellas. They're actually fairly short, and it's, you know, I think it's a real skill to pack a lot into such a short space. But I do sometimes wonder whether, especially in this day and age when we've all got, you know, less extended periods of time and stuff, I think it's a beautiful book, perfectly done, basically, a gem.
I kind of get where you're coming from about the novellas, because it's something to, I'll be honest, I prefer the big tomes, you know, that take you weeks to get through. And I've always been sort of not anti-novella, but never really sort of bothered with them. And then somebody sent me, Sally Rigby sent me an advance review copy of one of hers. It was like a freebie that she was going to sort of send out. So it was very, very small. I thought, I'll give it a go, and I loved it. So it's got me now thinking, well, I need to read more novellas, you know. So it's just one of them where you think you'll be sort of undersold, but in the story, if you only read novella. But that's definitely not the case, especially as you say with the classics, because they just condense it, don't they? Somehow, you know, it's very clever. And what's your book number 6, Catherine?
I've run out of actual copies of them now. So
you've run out of books.
This one I lent to my dad, I don't know, several years ago, and he swears that he doesn't have it, but he definitely does. So anyway, it's Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses, which is the first book in his Border trilogy. And again, it was the language for me. Like I've read other stuff by Cormac McCarthy and not enjoyed it that much. And certainly something like The Road, I found like really just bleak and depressing. But when I read All the Pretty Horses, it was almost for me like reading poetry as prose. Just he like captures the language of a place, in this case, the kind of southwestern US and kind of the border region with Mexico. But he kind of makes it into something that's just almost magical, I found. And, you know, the story itself is basically these two boys going on a horse trek, you know, into Mexico to become cowboys. And, you know, some things happen along the way, but it's not, you know, a big dramatic. But I don't know, I just absolutely fell in love with the language. And I don't read a huge amount of poetry, and I'm not into poetry, and I couldn't quote you anything beyond doggerel, I don't think. But this book, I think, it almost brought me to tears, and I don't really know why. I just found the writing extraordinary, you know, and I think I love it for that reason, for just the use of language. I think it's not about the story, it's just about the words on the page and how he's written it. Like, you know, I can't really describe it in any sort of, and I, you know, other people wouldn't necessarily find it that way, but for me, yeah, there was just something utterly exquisite about the way he strings sentences together in that book.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've got one question just come in. Sorry, that just distracting you. But yeah, it's surprising how, you know, you can get into something like that, particularly as you say, something that you maybe wouldn't normally read, but something just about the story or about characters or whatever just pulls you in and you're hooked, you know. So it's very interesting. So Philippa, what is your last book number 7?
Well, I thought that if Katherine and I were stuck on a desert island for an indefinite period, and life would probably be a little bit hard for a while, and we might need a little bit of a chuckle now and again, I thought, what could be better than Calvin and Hobbes, Weirdos from Another Planet by Bill Watterson. So our dad and Katherine and I were reading Garfield for a while, and my dad found that we were reading Garfield. We were probably about 10 or something at the time. And he said, you don't want to read Garfield, you want to read Calvin and Hobbes. And we were like, what damn, what's Calvin and Hobbes? Anyway, he got this book. I mean, we probably just went to the local bookshop and bought a copy. And we just started reading the first, the first strip, which is basically when Calvin suddenly discovers, to his absolute horror, that his parents are going out for dinner and Rosalind, the babysitter from hell, is coming to look after him. And I just was in stitches, you know, throughout, you know, from the beginning. And I just think it's such a lovely cartoon strip. And again, funnily enough, it's about Calvin's relationship with Hobbes, Hobbes' relationship with Calvin, his kind of slightly disturbed relationship with his parents, their relationship to him. But it's very entertaining and funny, but it's very heartwarming as well. And if anybody out there has not yet discovered Calvin and Hobbes, I would highly recommend for a giggle in these tough times.
That's what we all need, isn't it? A little bit of a giggle. So that's a great one to take to the island with you, and a nice one to sort of end your selections with. We're getting lots of cat visitors today, aren't we? So it's nice to see them. Nels looks like it's engrossed in the conversation. Just sat there listening to every single word. But hello to all the pets that are joining us. So anyway, actually, try to not get distracted, and we'll go on to you, Katherine, for your last book.
So my last book is by an author that I discovered maybe 2-3 years ago, Tana French, and she has a series basically called the Dublin Murder Squad series, which I think they're just like detective kind of crime fiction as it should be written, really. A bit like Kate Atkinson's sort of case histories, in the sense that they're detective novels, but they're kind of just several classes above your average fare, I think, in that genre. She writes in a way that's literary but without being too literary, and I think quite a lot of the time with sort of crime or detective fiction, you have these sort of plots that seem like quite convoluted at the beginning, or are very convoluted, and then there's this big reveal at the end, and you're sort of like, oh. I don't know, they're always somehow slightly anticlimactic, and you also kind of end up thinking, well, in real life, people just don't behave like that. And I think what's interesting about Tana French's books is that you kind of, for me anyway, the motivations for the things that the people do and the reasons why they do them all actually kind of have a grounding in reality and seem very coherent. And she manages to weave these kind of, very involved narratives out of just things that people would actually do and say and feel. And there's quite a large element of psychology in those books, I think. And the interesting thing that she has with the series is that they tend to follow a kind of a detective team, a team of two. And the first book is about these two people, and then the second book is about one of that pairing plus another one, and then again it switches on the third one to, so she develops all these characters through the course of the book, and the course of the series rather. And my favorite one is the second one, which is called The Likeness, and they find the dead body of a girl who happens to be pretty much the doppelganger of this detective, and she then pretends to be this person to kind of it's quite secret history, the secret history influenced, I think. It's about this sort of aloof group of students who seem to have this slightly odd relationship, and she tries to infiltrate their world, really, to sort of try and find out what happened to this girl. I think she's just, they're page turners, but they're hugely enjoyable and really, really satisfying when you get to the end and you think, yes, that makes sense, and just, I love them. I can't recommend them enough. I think there's about 7 in that series, and a standalone one, and then another one that she's done recently, but she's brilliant, and I absolutely adore her. So whenever the next one comes out, I'm waiting.
You'll be queuing up at the bookshop.
Yeah, I've registered, and sit in the bookshop and read it,
Great, sounds really, really good, and again, a great one to end on. So now you've got your 7 books each packed in your suitcase. You're ready to go off to the island. Now, we believe that on the island, on the Montague Island, the fictitious island, there is about 1 hour of electricity every day. That's all you get, 1 hour. So you're allowed to take some music, or, well, a CD. So it can be music, it can be an audio book, it can be whatever you wish in CD format. So Philippa, which CD have you chosen to take with you?
I want to see if Katherine can guess.
Well, you mentioned ABBA Gold the other night, so...
Yeah! ABBA Gold! I'm sorry, you can argue with me about this till the cows come home, but you just can't beat a bit of ABBA. And
I agree.
What, as Alan Partridge would say, what would be the best ABBA CD? Well, best of ABBA, obviously. So there we go.
I love it. Love the Alan Partridge quote in there as well. So yeah, and you can't get sort of down listening to a bit of ABBA, can you? It's always
exactly. Well, they've got they've probably got some songs that they're more Scandinavian than well, like, they'd probably be quite. No, I was thinking this isn't a desert island. This is like a cold island. They've got that kind of Scandinavian nostalgic, haunting thing going on in some of their songs. That would probably be quite good for when Katherine and I are feeling a bit down in the dumps about our situation.
Yeah.
But then we can put on Dancing Queen and, you know,
have a dance,
collect coke,
warm up.
have a dance. Yeah. So I think it will cover all bases, basically. Yeah.
Great album, must admit. Yeah, I like that
And
one.
there's even a song on it called SOS. So that would come in handy as well for getting rescued.
A great song, yeah. So keep playing that, and somebody may come and rescue you. So, what's your CD that you're taking along, Katherine?
You know, I really struggled with this one because I'm not really a music person. I know that sounds terrible, but I like music and I do listen to it, but I don't kind of have a love of music and feel the need to kind of have music on all the time. In fact, I hardly ever have music on. So I really struggled with this one, and I kind of, in the end, I was like, I think it would probably have to be something really crap, like
Gold
27 or something, some, you know, anthology from
the latest now version,
that was just like a basic, you know, like 100 different sort of hits from, I don't know, the 90s or something, when, you know, I was in my prime, clearly. I don't know, I can't come up with anything erudite or, you know, impressive in relation to this question. I'm just
a 90s compilation, the best of the 90s or something like that compilation.
Yeah, something, or maybe the 80s, who knows? But yeah,
maybe you'll do well on that, because you might get you know, one with like 2 or 3 CDs in. So
well, yeah, exactly. You know, like sort of best songs of all time or something.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like I'll just hedge my bets and then, you know.
Hope for the best. That's great. Speaking of music, I know you said, Katherine, that you don't sort of listen to a great deal. Philippa, when you're writing, do you listen in silence? Do you write, I should say, in silence, or do you like a bit of music in the background?
Yeah, I tend to actually put on basically, I suppose it's like Muzak, you would call it. So I have this CD that I don't even know where I got it from. I don't subscribe to the Daily Mail, but it came free with the Daily Mail. This one happens to be Romantic Classics 2. And I just put it on in the background and on a loop, basically. And it just kind of gets me in the zone. So there's no lyrics. There's no pieces that are massive standouts or anything like that. But it's my cue to be at my desk and writing. And I mostly just zone out from listening to it when I'm writing. But it kind of, sometimes the silence feels a little bit too like, you know, write something amazing, and then, you know, if you've got the music on, you can kind of relax a little bit.
Yeah, drift off a little bit before you get writing. But you mentioned that got me thinking about things, but that's for another day. But yeah, great choice, and great sort of interesting to hear what you sort of listen to. So now we go on to look at your DVD selection. Now, a DVD can be, you know, it can be a film, it can be a TV series, it can be, you know, a music concert, whatever. So what have you chosen, Philippa, for your DVD?
I guess I was thinking in terms of films and thinking, what is some of my favorite films that I would watch again and again? And I picked Dirty Dancing. And so many people love Dirty Dancing. It's a great film. I mean, Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze are amazing in it. And if you Google audition tape for those two, you'll see some great footage of them auditioning, and it's like, oh my god, the chemistry. But I think, like, again, I often think it's really interesting what films kind of stand the test of time and why they do. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons that Dirty Dancing stands the test of time, particularly because there were all these films off the back of it that were about dance schools and dance competitions and all of this, they were all missing the point. Dirty Dancing is not a film about dancing. Dirty Dancing is a coming of age film. It's a beautiful coming of age film. And it's basically the story of this young woman on the cusp of adulthood who is mentored almost by Patrick Swayze's character to come into her maturity, into her sexual maturity. And there's that really heartbreaking scene where she realizes that her dad is not perfect, and she grows up from being a daddy's little girl to being a woman in the world. And if you notice, people think of it as a romance story, but actually I'm not entirely sure that they stay together in the end. You know, he's off to his next job, she's probably going to go back home, go off to university or whatever, but that's not the point. They don't need to stay together. You know, he's given her his gift of her coming into her own self, and it's a beautiful film in that way. Yeah, and please never watch the 2016 remake if you don't want to have your childhood ruined forever. Please don't watch it.
Yeah, that's another one we were getting about from books into films. Remakes is a similar conversation, isn't it? You don't go into if you really enjoyed a film, you don't go and watch a remake, because it'll just no matter how much money they spend on it, it'll just spoil it. But yeah, good choice on that one. And what's yours going to be, Katherine? Your DVD?
Clearly we're related because we have a theme, but mine is Billy Elliot.
Coming in age dancing film.
Dancing. And I love it because it's a film about dancing, and it has an amazing soundtrack of T-Rex mostly, but you know, I love films that are kind of slightly quirky, that have these sort of slight oddities to them in the kind of the cinematography or the timeline or the chronology, and there are little quirks all the way through that film. And you know, it's sort of it's set against this background of, you know, the miners' strikes in the north of England, and you know, there's sort of this tragic element of, you know, his sort of life is just beginning, and his dad and his brother's lives are basically ending, you know, or at least their lives as they know it. And you know, it's this one of those films that gives you this big warm fuzzy feeling when you watch it, and you think, oh, maybe, you know, if I'd gone to ballet school, that would be me. But you know, yeah, you know, brilliant music, you know, sort of the acting in it, especially from, I've forgotten his name now, Jamie Bell. Yeah, you know, who was, you know, had not acted before, he did this. And then of course you've got Julie Walters doing Julie Walters and being incredible in it. And yeah, you know, I love it. If I'd known, however, that we were allowed to do TV series, I might have chosen something different, which is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which but only seasons 1 to 6, because season 7 was a disaster, which is just a classic of its own, and should be watched by everyone, especially teenagers, for the humor and the allegories and metaphors, and you know, just general action and humor. So yeah,
great. I think it's been interesting as well, because both the DVDs that you both chosen are about relationships and characters coming back to the books. So there's definitely, you know, big sort of connection there as well. So that's interesting. So now we move on to a food that you're going to take with you. Now this can be you know, a food ingredient, it could be a meal, you know, that you sort of really enjoy or that brings back memories. So we're performing a bit of a magic with this one. It's like an everlasting food or an everlasting meal. So what food would you take, Philippa?
Well, this will come as no surprise to Katherine, but it would be spaghetti. Because, well, first of all,
that's ketchup to put on it, Helen.
Yeah, we can probably take a few bottles of ketchup, maybe. But I thought that's quite handy.
Like something like spaghetti bolognese, because if you just took spaghetti, it would be a bit boring.
I can live with that. I can have just plain spaghetti, as long as there's some salt to put in the water, which would be fine. We could use seawater.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I could pretty much live on spaghetti. So I think that would be both practical and tasty for our shipwreck on the island. Yeah, I mean, Katherine might not enjoy it, but when it was my turn to cook, she'd be like, that's spaghetti again. But
your luxury item might have to be laxatives if all Helen's
yeah. So what's your food going to be?
Mine would be a meal, a dish. It's a Thai dish called pad see ew, which is basically a kind of a fried noodle dish, which I could eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days of the week and 365 days of the year, I think.
You may ask you if you don't like spaghetti.
I love spaghetti, but I love this more. And
That sounds tasty. I'll be happy with that.
It's just delicious. So spicy, it's got greens in it, Helen, and but with vinegar and sugar, and absolutely amazing.
Wonderful. And something that you could keep going back to, so that's great. So we've got your foods all packed. So we come down to our last item now, and we've had some strange things taken on the luxury item. So, so what are you going to take, Philippa, for your luxury item?
A hot water bottle, because I'm always cold, even when it's hot. Like, actually, I mean, I know we're in summer now, but last night I did have a hot water bottle. So yeah, I would just have my trust. Probably, if I could take like 4, that would be good. You know, one for my feet, knees, stomach, top half. You know, then I'd be quite happy. So. Hot water bottle, thank you. Yes.
Great. Good choice. Very apt for the weather conditions on the island. And Katherine, what's yours going to be?
Oh yeah, I struggled with this one as well. I know one of your previous episodes, somebody said a hot tub, and I thought that was probably pretty luxurious and also quite handy if you're stuck on an island off the coast of Cumbria. And presumably Helen won't share her hot water bottles with me. So I think I'd have to go with a hot tub, and then I could read in the bath.
Yeah. Just stay in the bath and help. You can sort of get around the hot water bottles, and you've got the hot tub to yourself.
We'll probably fill our hot water bottles up from the hot tub. So,
or I could top you up from my hot water bottles. Either way.
Dual usage, but very interesting and great. Well, thanks very much for. I've just realised the time. I didn't realise we've been going on so long. Time flies when you start talking about books and different things. So sorry to keep you out of bed, Philip.
Oh no, I've had an absolute pleasure. It's been brilliant. Thank you so much, Joe. And I could just talk for 7 hours straight about this stuff.
So just before we finish, I'm just wondering if any of our audience that's with us want to unmute themselves and ask a question, or they can ask it in the they can type it into the chat. No, that's fair enough.
They're all falling asleep. They're in bed.
One question I have that I meant to ask earlier is, what comes next, Philippa? What are you currently working on, or what are you going to be working on?
Ooh, yeah, so hang on one sec. Oops. This is the work in progress with some editorial notes on it of book 3, which is due to come out next year. I've had a few false starts with this book, so it's I was talking to Nell about this the other day and pouring out all my woes on the roller coaster of book 3. But yeah, it's due to come out next year. It's basically another psych suspense book. It's about the Goodlight family, who are a wealthy family living in Oxford. They have a teenage daughter who is a violin prodigy, 17 years old, and she is taking part in the Young Musician of the Year award, which is the most prestigious music competition for people her age. And she gives an absolutely jaw-dropping performance at the televised semi-finals, and then completely vanishes. And the story is unraveling what the hell has been going on.
So you're now up to the editing stage on that, did you say now?
Well, no, that's more my own edits. So I'm still completing the shitty first draft, but I'm hoping to get it to my editor at the end of this month or beginning of next month. So hopefully I'm on track now with this book after, as I say, a few false starts. So keep your eyes out next year for that book. It doesn't have a title yet, but I will let you know all of the details near the time.
watch this space, as they say. And
Exactly.
it's brought me on to another final question. I won't ask any more after this, but what is your favourite and worst part, if there is such a thing, of the writing process?
Of the writing process?
You know, is it the actual doing the first draft? Is it the editing, or is it the polishing up ready for publication? Or
I enjoy the first draft because I write really quick and dirty, and I don't worry about getting it right. So I often have a lot of fun with the first draft, which I'm kind of exploring and just playing around with lots of ideas. I hate then having to turn all of that into something workable and discovering that it's a complete mess and most of it's going to have to be binned. And then my sort of next favorite part is at the stage of like copy edits, which is just putting the final tiny tweaks in, and it just feels like everything is just slotting together, and it's like it just feels like the book is beautiful and alive at that point.
Great, wonderful. And one final question for Katherine. Have you considered following in your sister's footsteps?
Well, you know, I wouldn't want to outdo her, so.
Good answer.
Well, they say everybody's got one novel in them, don't they? But I think it's not really my, it wouldn't be my choice of creative expression. So no, I think I'll leave it to Helen to, you know, carry the torch in that department. And when I eventually escape being a lawyer, I will go and do other creative things, but not writing. Dad, you're way too late.
No, I've been listening, and I still refute the question of whether we go have that book. I think it has become something in your mind like the Easter egg.
Yeah.
The Easter egg my Easter egg that Katherine ate.
I admit that. I hold my hands up to that, but I also know that I gave you a copy of the Border Trilogy, and you've never given it back.
Well,
anyway,
I think that's your dad.
That's our dad, yeah.
That's your dad, yeah.
And mum.
And mum. Great to see you both. Great to see you both.
I told you it was our parents. I said, I bet you iPad 3 is our parents.
So now we have the identity of iPad 3.
Yeah, it's all is revealed at the end. It was the mystery of the whole show.
So that's great. So just to let everyone know, as I say, this will be updated on YouTube. It'll be uploaded on YouTube tomorrow. And then we've had a couple of cancellations for illness and holidays and what have you. But the next one now is on the 8th of July. That's Lisa Le Bon. And on the 15th of July, we've got Denise Taylor and a few more lined up for July. So that's an idea of what's coming up. So just finally, Philippa, do you want to give everyone, for anyone who's joined late or come part way through the recording, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your books again and where people can buy them and where they can get hold of you?
Yeah, perfect. So these are my two books. Little White Lies, my debut. Safe and Sound is my latest release. They're available in ebook, paperback and audio, and basically you can find them wherever you normally buy your books, both in the bookshops and online. You can find me on Twitter, Philippa_East, and yeah, enjoy basically and come and say hi.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for attending this evening. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I certainly have. And we will see you again very soon, and enjoy your time on the island. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye. Thank you so much, Joe. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.